welcome to 10 Talks. Today's conversation is all about understanding bias. What does that mean? Our world has been talking about it. It certainly is something that we're now familiar with, which is great, versus used to if we would have talked about it, meaning 15 minutes ago, as much as our world has changed, it would have been a very different definition. Our guest today is passionate about educating us on what is this, what's the difference between men and women, how we compete. We have a lot to unpack. So Tom, thank you so much for being a guest for us today. And we'd love to start with the power of your story. Tell us kind of who you are and why this is so much a passion for you.
Thank you, Carlette. It's an honor to be here and to talk to your audience. I am passionate about this issue. I'd say my story is that I'm a civil rights lawyer here in Iowa. I grew up in Iowa, a very white state, but about 23 or 4 years ago, been a lawyer for about 34 years, I began to notice differences in how, for example, African Americans were being treated, and it was not explainable by the traditional ways we think about discrimination, racism and isms and that kind of thing. So I began searching for a different answer. And so I began to research, at the time, unconscious bias and stereotyping, more subtle forms of potential discrimination. And I came across a man by the name of Tony Greenwald, who was the inventor of the implicit association test, which you can take online, which kind of helps you determine if you may have some implicit biases such as gender and race, more subtle biases, shall we say, the subconscious level, and began to, kind of incorporate that into my practice of the law. I then took a number of cases where, I was trying to help African Americans in particular, but not exclusively, but for Iowa, a lot of cases for African Americans, to kind of break through the barriers that had prevented them from achieving full equality and that were not being resolved by the normal litigation process. And then later on, about 15 years ago, I began to take this knowledge and apply it much more to gender and coaching. And then I started realizing that, that there were really two major forces of bias in the United States that were holding us back. One is African Americans across a number of decision-making processes, including the criminal justice system. We're all familiar with that, protests, et cetera, more familiar today. But the other one's for women in not every role, but leadership roles. There's a reason why we don't have a female president, for example. And it's not just because only sexist men don't vote for women. It's because a lot of people don't vote for women, and a lot of women don't vote for women. We hold biases about women in leadership roles. And one of the primary leadership roles in the country that is important in athletics is, of course, being a head coach or an assistant coach of a Division I, II, or III athletic team. And so I began to notice that there were these potential of biases that were holding back women, and then started to take those cases as a lawyer, but then also began to develop my knowledge to kind of being able to educate on this issue to, in simple terms, Carlette, what I'd like to do, even though my day job is that of being a lawyer and I do file claims on behalf of coaches, I'd like to put myself out of business doing that. And one way to do that is to raise awareness and educate. And that starts with your audience, and not just universities, but everyone who loves sport.
Well, and people, I would think, in terms of, I think about parents, I think about student athletes, I think about us in the workforce. I mean, the gift of your passion and the research that you've committed to doing and practicing is that I think it affects all of us, men, women, certainly our daughters, how they're perceived, the leadership roles. So I'm just curious, before we just get into all of the research and really what this is how did you find such a passion for this, just from going from being an attorney to now really devoted to wanting to put yourself out of business and educate our world on this?
I think it's just everybody has a different view of the world. My view of the world is less black and white than maybe some people. In the law, you're kind of forced into the black and white view, meaning you're evil, I'm good, you're racist, I'm not, etc. You're kind of forced into this polarized view of the world. I don't look at the world that way. I think that there are gray areas. There's things that people do, even things that seem fairly horrible sometimes, that are the result of mental processing and functioning that is more explainable and understandable, and we can do something about it. So it just kind of made sense to me internally. And then plus, I guess I don't know, I think that I'm a 58-year-old heterosexual white male. In other words, under the definition of in-group, it says, see Tom Newkirk effectively. I mean, I'm the definition of it. And as a person who's effectively, in my view, immune from the harmful effects of gender race bias. I just knew that there was something about it that was unfair. In other words, I work very hard, like you do, Carlette. I think I'm successful as a lawyer partly because I outwork my competitors to some extent, and there are a lot of other people that work really hard as well. But I didn't like the idea that I would have a leg up just because I happen to be in a certain group, because I think I can beat people without a leg up. I don't need it, and so it just kind of made sense to me as a human being. And I also know that there's, you like to make a difference in the world, and I like to, when you deal with these systemic issues of race and gender, you see how powerful they are and how much damage they cause. That if you could find a way to break through the barriers that prevent us from really breaking through on issues of race in the criminal justice system and gender, you could actually make a shift in society that would not take another 100 years or another 50 years since Title IX to do it. So that's kind of why it's important to me.
Well, Tom, thank you. So for our conversation, we're going to start with education. We really want to educate us on really what is this. The word bias you already mentioned, subconscious and implicit. There's a lot to even explore around being educated just on what is bias, and you'll take us through that. We're then going to move right into solutions. We want to figure out how to make that shift and how to be champions for the change. That's what's so powerful about you and your passion, and you then educating us and handing us some power to really understand inside the education, the solution, and then being those champions for change. So let's start with educating us.
Sure. So bias, we're all familiar generally with, we all have biases. I think most human beings today understand that. You have biases in favor of your kids, your alma mater, your favorite sports team, whatever it happens to be. So we hold these biases, but we also know that now today that we hold biases. We're familiar with prejudice toward Black people, prejudice toward Asian people, prejudice toward women. Okay, we're familiar with that. But what we've come to learn in the last 20 years or so is that because of how society kind of like inundates us with certain images, even today, even someone like me, who's a civil rights lawyer, I have pictures all over my office of equal rights for African Americans and other groups. Even someone like me can hold biases at a subconscious level that create an automatic association with something negative. For example, a very commonly held bias toward African Americans at an implicit level, a subconscious level, are Blacks and crime. So therefore, it can cause police officers who may not be racist, who might even be very, very proactive in equality for African Americans, to then follow an African American in their car and pull them over more quickly. It can create that automatic response. And the same is true with women. We can, we have implicit biases where we associate women, for example, with caring for the family. We don't associate you as much with your career and being proactive and being a leader and that kind of stuff. There's certain images where we've had males in these roles of police officer, coach, president, etc., for so long that we mentally image that as being associated with males and male behavior. So therefore, what it means is that, a host of human beings, in your audience, if there's of every 100 members of your audience, 70% of them, or 70 of them, are going to hold potentially implicit automatic associations with African Americans that are largely negative. And they're going to hold some similar associations with women that are not always negative, but they're stereotyping. I mean, for example, I might describe you someone, Carlette, who is caring and nurturing. That may be true, and that may be a compliment to you. But it's also potentially my automatic association that because you're female, you must be caring and nurturing, or more so than me. And so it's a limiting type of thing, but it kind of works at an automatic level. Like, for example, when I say the word peanut butter, my brain says jelly, right? That's what I put on a peanut butter sandwich. But so what I do is it's automatic association, right? One goes with the other. They're layered together. Well, if you have Blacks crime, male leader, female emotional, Asian smart, you have all these automatic associations that occur across groups, and it works at a subconscious level. It's very difficult to control it. And so that's one aspect, and that's what implicit bias is. That's different than, say, what people think of as explicit forms of sexism or racism.
Tell us about that difference.
Well, I mean, it's really when you think of, that's why when I teach people about this, I don't use racism or sexism other than as a contrast to what I'm talking about. And the reason why is this, that, again, Tom Newkirk, I don't believe I'm racist. I don't think that way. I haven't never thought that way. I don't hold strong stereotypes toward African Americans, and I reject them if they cross my mind. But again, I still can have an automatic connection between an African American and a certain stereotype working below my level of consciousness. That's different than someone who says Black people are only good at basketball. All Black people are criminals, like people you think of as more racist. So explicit racism is the thing we say, and we all object as prejudice, but the hidden bias or the implicit bias, this thing that works at our subconscious level, in my view, creates far more harm. And so it'd be like this. When I educate, I use what's called a medical analogy to make my point sometimes. So, implicit bias is like bacteria. Okay, it's invisible, it causes harm, and people can do something about it. But it's like if you go into a hospital and you bring your relative in there for surgery, you expect them to take care to manage the potential bacteria that can harm them. But just because the bacteria gets in and harms your relative, may cause them illness or even death, it's not like the doctor intentionally did it. He didn't put hands in dirt and then go touch your relative to create the harm. That's explicit type of harm. The bacteria just seeped in, and that's what implicit bias is more similar to.
Interesting. So I'd really be curious about, from a woman's perspective, let's talk about women to women and how they support each other or don't support each other. What have you found in your research and work with women to women interactions?
Well, there's probably two components to that. I mean, I'm not talking personally, I don't talk about the cultural ways that I think that, for example, something called queen bee syndrome, which is a scientifically shown thing that a woman who is in a leadership role may distance herself from people below her who are women, but the women below her expect her not to do that. And so they kind of like, it creates this artificial distance. But what's happening is that the woman in a leadership role is there kind of hanging on by her fingernails sometimes because she needs to be a certain way to exist. And therefore she separates herself. So it creates maybe a cultural conflict in a way. But what I deal with is, for the most part, is that human beings, regardless of whether they're male or female, will hold to a large extent implicit biases that can affect our subconsciously held evaluations of a female when she steps into a leadership role. And for your particular audiences, whether it's in athletics or leadership roles, it can be that, for example, I'm a customer service manager in a company, and then I'm a female. I get promoted to that of being a director. Even though I may be a low-level manager, the bias may not affect me that much, but as I move up the chain of command, the negative biases associated with me being a leader become more and more stronger and stronger. And so therefore you can be judged differently and evaluated differently as you move up the chain of command. For a female coach, again, the question is, as she steps into that role, remember, when you're in a leadership role, whether it's in private business or whether it's in coaching, once you step into the shoes of that leader or that male type role, you're going to be evaluated differently. You're going to be expected to behave differently, because to get there, you kind of got to act a little bit more like a man, meaning direct, not really like men are all like this, but the image of a man, direct, almost arrogant in a way, just certain characteristics you're supposed to have of a leader that you're supposed to have to be in that role. But when a woman steps into that role, a large number of people will dislike her acting in that way. So she's exhibiting certain behavior similar to a man to be successful in the role of coach or CEO or leader of an organization, but she has to walk a lot of lines to prevent people, and that can be male subordinates, female subordinates, male peers, female peers, and the public from actually disliking how she has to be to exist in that role. And so that's the primary source of implicit bias that creates conflict for female coaches in the United States. And remember, the key is that the both male and female athletes will exhibit this bias toward a female. It doesn't mean that every single athlete's going to do that. It doesn't mean that a woman who's as biased can make it as a coach. I'm sure you know many who have been successful at coaching for many, many years. But what happens is that because the bias is there, It's always like tapping on her shoulder, like just a little bit of pressure. You have to try a little bit harder. You have to do a little bit more. You have to pay attention a little bit more. And if you let down, or you have a bad luck, or you have bad season, or you just have a bad day, it can completely knock your feet out from under you as a female coach. Again, that's just coaching. And just as an aside note, Carlette, I want to note for listeners that I focus on African Americans when I speak on that issue, not because I'm ignoring other groups, Latinx groups or Native Americans or Asians, et cetera. I focus on women, not because I'm ignoring other gendered issues, LGBTQ issues. It's not that. When you're trying to solve a systemic problem, if you're trying to put me out of business, if you will, if you start talking about everybody, you lose focus and you gain no ground. Yeah. But I will just tell you that, for example, if I could convince a university to eliminate gender bias from its, for example, just the evaluation of student complaints about a coach, it would bleed out, and it would therefore create equality through a host of decision-making within the university as a whole, and would help everyone. And then you could take that and you could also bleed it out into how African Americans are treated. And the reason why is because if you eliminate the bias, the bacteria, if you will, it protects everybody. Like, you don't go into a hospital and wash your hands to just protect against one form of bacteria, Carlette. You're protecting against all forms. You may wash your hands more in the surgery ward or the cancer ward or something like that more often but in the end of the day, you're taking steps. To your point earlier about being proactive and trying to make change, you can take steps to fix it for everybody. So I talk a lot about, the biases that exist toward a female coach and direct toward female athletes, because it is a very focused, it's a huge problem in society. It reflects a lot of other biases, and it can do a tremendous amount of good if we can fix it. And there's actually a very limited group of people. I mean, if even all the coaches that you've contacted in your life, Carlette, and I have contacted, just all of them, just that group, which isn't all of them, stood up together at the same time and said, we want change would occur. That's how powerful this can be.
Well, let's talk about the solutions, because that certainly gives us motivation and inspiration to figure this out. So if we all stood up and said, we're ready for the change, tell us about that change.
Well, the first thing that has to happen is awareness. Okay. I mean, go back to my analogy of bacteria. Okay. I use this sometimes. I say, okay, let's imagine, Carlette, that you and I went back in time in a time machine together to 1850. And we had to go into a hospital at the time. They didn't even understand what bacteria was. They kind of had heard of it. They generally knew to kind of maybe wash their linens once in a while, but there was no sterilization processes. There was no covering of mouths. It was a tremendous amount of death and destruction because of bacteria that was unmanaged. Now, we had to go in, the two of us, and explain to them, hey, look, there's this invisible thing that's a microscopic level that seeps into your body and creates damage and harm. All you need to do is do these things to fix it. Now, you and I would either be thrown in jail or the insane asylum, or we'd be ignored, or we might make a difference if we found the right person. So right now with implicit bias, that is my main challenge, is that even though people are aware of it, and believe me, if I wouldn't have this conversation with you even 20 years ago. Nobody was listening 20 years ago. Even 10 years ago, they weren't. But people are starting to listen now. So the question is, if you can get people to be aware of the bias, the bacteria, then you can say, okay, I'm ready to invest some time and energy in stopping it. So how do you do that? Well, the problem with implicit bias is, for gender alone, it covers a whole host of decision-making. It's hiring, it's promotion, it's pay. But what I say is just start small. Like if I go to the hospital analogy, I'd say, okay, hospital, you're not certain you want to take Carlette's and I advice about washing your hands and everything. Why don't we just do this? Let's just fix your surgery department. Just take surgery where people are cutting into people, and let's wash our hands several times, cover our mouths, sterilize the instruments with super hot water. It's an investment of time to boil water back in 1850, maybe. I don't know what it was. So you've got to do this. So let's do that. Then let's see over 6 months whether or not fewer people die. Okay, here's a mini experiment. Doesn't cost you that much money. And you can have a great impact, right? You don't have to worry about everything else. You don't have to worry about the whole hospital. So the same thing's true in an organization or administration. So like in university setting, college setting, you would say, let's start small. I say we focus on student complaints toward female coaches and or male coaches. Why? because it's a headache. It's incredibly expensive. What's happening, universities and colleges hate dealing with it. I know they do. They don't want to fire these coaches willy-nilly. They just feel like they're just caught up in it. And it's getting out of control. Everyone agrees it's undermining the athletes, it's undermining the coaches. It's a huge systemic problem, but it's relatively easily fixed in a weird way.
Tell us about that. Love to hear the fixing. Yeah.
No, anyway, but the point is you've got to understand the foundation before you get the fix, at least in my view. And so the fix is simply this, that when you have to have awareness that bacteria bias exists, number one. That does not exist in universities at a high level. That's number one problem. So that's number one fix, is awareness, education, admission. Two, if you're aware of it, okay, so Carlette, you're my university administrator and you're saying, Tom, I get it. I believe in the bias. Tell me what to do. Okay, I'll say, here we go. First thing is you just simply need to design a protocol to collect complaints. So you're identifying, what are you trying to do, Carlette? You don't want to ignore the next Larry Nassar of the world in your university if that happens, but you don't want to enable a bunch of petty bias complaints toward women or African Americans. So how do you do both? Well, you have a protocol in place, but you have to treat these young athletes as adults, meaning that they're 18 to 22-year-old adults. What can they do? They have the ability to write, meaning they can write down their complaint. They can be expected to articulate the complaint with specificity, meaning you don't get to use labels like she made me feel bad, she was a bully, he was mean, he made me feel bad about myself. You get to say things like, my coach did the following behaviors that I observed in the following way that I believe are over the policy line or this line in the following ways. We expect that of any 18 to 20-year-old human being in every single employer in the United States, other than in college and universities. Only in college and universities do we treat them like they're children, like they need to be enabled in some way, that they can't be required to write down their concerns. And so how is this a remedy? The writing down of the complaint with specificity and accuracy and clarity is like washing your hands before surgery. The human being bias exhibits itself when you're allowed to use labels. You know, there's something about Carlette I just didn't like. Can you describe it? Was she rude to you? Did she speak to you? What was it? If I can't describe it, that normally means that bias could be in play. And so therefore, if you can describe it cleanly and clearly, it's going to eliminate a host of bias-driven claims about coaches. That's just step one. So you've got awareness and education and recognition. You've got a complaint process that it has accountability measures built into it, okay? Meaning that the athlete has to write it down, has to be specific. And then you've got a process where they follow the chain of command and people above it are trained to eliminate. Then you have to do a next step, which is to establish standards like coaching. Right now, there are no standards in coaching. People think there are standards in coaching, but there really aren't standards in coaching. For example, can you swear? How often can you swear? How kind of words can you use? But there's no standard even on the language you use or the amount of volume you use. And you can't have perfect standards, but you can have guidance. Because at the end of the day, any coach, any professional should have the right to say, if I'm behaving in a professional manner and on the standards of my profession, the human being on the other side of this does not get to label me as abusive. For example, I mean, I'm speaking in a normal tone of voice. I'm speaking passionately about it. If I was in a different podcast, I might actually use the foul language as my methodology tool. And I might actually make coaches worry about their futures because I'm telling them that your future's at risk. But the fact that coaches happen to respond negatively to how I choose to speak to them in a professional way, should be impossible for them to define me as abusive just because they feel bad. Because I'm not trying to make them feel bad. It's the way of the world. And so you've got to be able to set standards of what behavior is acceptable. And so if you just do that, training and awareness and recognition of bias as a risk, and the people who engage in this process are all relatively trained on it. You have accountability measures in your collecting of complaints and your review of complaints. And then you have a standard there that kind of like allows them to corral what is actually over the line or not. And the final touch would be that you would, you use a counterintuitive process to kind of clear the air, which means that how do you ensure that complaints about women aren't getting through in a biased way? you go apply it to a male. You say that, okay, we've talked to this coach. We think maybe she did this and this that might be over the line. We think we've cleaned it out for gender, but does Jim do that over at the other basketball court? If he does, and we don't care, that's a double check on it to be sure that you didn't apply it. So this isn't a perfect system, but believe me, just like in a hospital, people still die of bacteria, right? People still get sick in hospitals, or bacteria that are too strong to be stopped by certain things. It's going to be the same way when it comes to bias. You'll never eliminate it all because it's part of our cognitive functioning. We can't survive without it in some ways. That's why I use bacteria as my analogy, because if you and I wanted to eliminate all the bacteria, we couldn't do it. It would kill us. We literally die. And the same thing's true if we try to eliminate the cognitive subconscious process in our brains, we would also all die. We'd freeze up and die, because we have to have that as part of our functioning. So those are just some steps that I've tried to recommend to universities. A couple have had, but again, you can take this thing that I just said, this process I've described, and apply it to really almost any type of decision-making process in an employer for pay, or a complaint process in a private employer, or in universities, but as a whole.
So how do you make sure that from the education perspective that our athletes or employees that want to file a complaint are really set up for success, to be able to articulate themselves, to be able to be heard, to be valued? Because ideally with this new education, we want it to be a win-win for everyone. We want the administration to be able to protect their coaches and their athletes and their university. We certainly know that as humans, we're going to have some bacteria in our lives in terms of really not being at our best self. Adding the stress component of high performance and adding the competition, adding all of the ingredients that basically make us who we are from a competitive great perspective. How do we do this?
Well, I wanted to pick up on, I'll come back to something you just said for a second about the stress component of coaching, because again, I think that's incredibly important and that everyone kind of ignores that. So I'm very excited you mentioned that, Carlette, but let me talk for a moment about how do you make it a win-win? Okay. When I sent you my bio that I use.
Let's do win-win-win, just so administrative, coaches, and athletes. I love a triple win. So
no problem. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. So when I make presentations, you'll see I've done like over 110 of them, I think, in the last few years alone. And I'm always speaking to people, whether it's on race, people look like me a lot of times, or people on gender. I'm speaking to people that have various levels of resistance or suspicion to it. And so I don't walk in there to create the win-win, in your case, win-win-win. You don't make it about blame and shame. I don't blame, I don't shame. I don't sue athletes for the most part for complaining about the coach, because a lot of this is at a subconscious level. But what I ask for is responsibility, right? Awareness and responsibility. I'm a white male. I'm immune from this stuff. How do I talk to people who look like me, who may feel that, may be suspicious of it, may be weird about it, may feel that they're under threat? Because nobody in the world is trying to accuse you of anything. I'm not accusing the administration of it. I'm not accusing the athlete of it. I'm saying, look, there is a bacteria here. There is a cognitively proven, scientifically established form of bias that causes harm in our society today. Nobody needs to feel shame about it. All you got to do is do something about it. It's that simple. And also you frame it as, for example, if I'm talking to a group of male coaches and male administrators, I'd say, look, this isn't about just protecting women and saying men are the problem. Women also have biases, number one. Number two is, do you understand that what's happening because of gender is that coaching is a profession? The profession of coaching is being undermined as a whole, which also harms athletes. And I would say to the athletes themselves, I'd say, for example, to the group of athletes who are not complaining about the coach, who value her strong coaching and mentoring. What's not being understood in most universities is that group of athletes who are female largely are not being heard at all. The ones who, I really like the coach who stresses me and does it in a way because it makes me a better human being. And I know I can be better because of her, and I enjoy her mentoring. We're only listening to the athletes who are the loudest complainers, whether it's for legitimate or illegitimate reasons. And to the athletes that are doing the complaining, I say to them, I'd say, look, the part of this process is to help you identify the sources of stress and harm that may actually exist in your life. For example, their Division I, not all division coaching, but certainly Division I athletics is difficult. Athlete has to be a good student and get up at 5 in the morning and go to the pool or go wherever they have to go, plus monitor their nutrition when everyone else is out eating fast food and drinking. They have to deal with, disappointment, et cetera. It's a very, very stressful, but also a character growing process, right? And so most people want to embrace that process. And yet there may be things that are causing people legitimate stress. There could be mental health issues that have, again, you need to separate what's causing the athlete actual stress from the natural blame that is placed on the female coach who just happens to be in their radar process and part of the stress, right? It's like there's a lot of stressors in life, but which one are you going to place the most, assign the most blame to? The head coach who, as you said, Carlette, their profession is stressing athletes, legitimately and carefully, but mental stress. You cannot become a high-performing athlete in almost any sport. I don't care if it's bowling, if you're not willing to either physically stress yourself and mentally stress yourself to concentrate, to focus, to break through those fears and doubts that drive us all insane, or that make us not want to get up out of the couch and watch TV. All those things that make me as a 58-year-old look around and say, why am I 25 pounds overweight? Why can't I break through? I need a coach. I need someone who's going to put some pressure on me. And so I think that there is absolutely a win-win-win available to it. And I would appeal to your audience and to you too. Part of this process that I was excited about and talking to you, Carlette, is I do not have all the answers to this process, because don't even claim to, because what I believe the group that does have the answers are the athletic community and the athletes and even the parents. You have to get buy-in and ownership of everyone of bias, at least on this stage, is real. It causes problems. It can affect not only our evaluation of coaches, by the way, it can affect differential evaluation of athletes in terms of their mental health issues from others in the administration. So there's lots of reasons to get your brain around this and saving, but to the point you were asking me to make is that it's not about blame and shame. It's about responsibility and making a difference. That's what it's really about.
And I hear responsibility, taking responsibility, being accountable to my words and what I'm claiming. And
Yes.
How do we really separate that feeling of, we hear toxic culture, we hear she made me feel bad about myself, any of these things, those feelings that are very valuable and very important. How do we separate them from the stress of coaching and high performance?
I think that you have to sit down and talk about it. I don't think anybody's ever tried to really do that. You may do it in your profession, Carlette, as much as you can, but at a systemic, broad level. Like, has the NCAA tried to do that? No. Has one specific university said, we're going to sit down and we're going to separate out the athletes, the appropriate level of physical and mental stress and the standards of coaching, and saying, look, if you as an athlete want to subject yourself to this, you are making a decision as an adult. Now, I know coaches do this all the time. I know they do. They recruit them and they say, look, it's not going to be any beds of roses here. Can you do it? Are you ready to do this? One of the coaches, Hall of Fame coaches I help, says, I tell the athletes, look, do you want to be on the podium? Do you want to be there? And they say, yes. They say, then look, I'm going to tell you how to get there. You may not like it, but this is what it takes to get there. And I believe this is what it takes to get there. But then what happens is that the blame of getting there starts to occur. And so you can't just have a conversation where you get agreement. You've got to have a process of, do you understand what you're getting into? And then having a way out for the athlete to say, look, if I can't make it, if I'm not going to make it through this process, I understand. I may not like it, but I understand that there's a process of me leaving that space. And if I'm going to decide to lay blame on some part of this process for me not making it, the only responsibility I have is to, other than being educated, is to, again, articulate specifically what that is and why. And you can't use, like you said, you can't use the mere fact of feelings as the methodology of defining someone else's behavior. You have to be able to describe it in some way. But it's a process, Carlette, there's no question. And I think that, what I keep, my reason I kind of went back in time and tried to describe this back in the 1850s is that you have to deal with that awareness issue first
Mhm.
before you can even get down the road to the win-win-win. I know a lot of times people look at me and say, Tom, I just want to know the 5-point plan. I want to know the 5-point plan. Give me the 3 takeaways. Well, the takeaway is, at what point in your life did you walk into a building and see the bacterial soap dispenser and say, I know what that is. I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
We're not there on bias in athletics right now. We've got to get there first. Then we can, but there are solutions. If people just, they don't need to be experts in it to do it. You just got to say, I buy into it. I believe it. Let's apply the solution. And then let's see if it makes a difference over 6 months or a year. Because I think that it will. And then part of that solution, Carlette's going to be figuring into your audience, anyone who has ideas, or, this is what I would say to the parents. This is what I would say to the athletes. This is what I want the administrator to be with me when I say this. I want all coaches to be in the room when we say this. And, maybe that's the answer. Or maybe it's asking the athletes, okay, especially the athletes who probably felt like complaining and probably felt that their coach was a horrible person at least once in their 4-year career. But when they got out of the 4 years, they realized it was fantastic.
Mm.
Get those athletes to come forward and say, you help us explain to athletes that are closer to your age why those feelings do not invalidate the coaching that's being done. And those feelings are real, but they shouldn't be turned on the coach or the system other in very specific circumstances. Maybe that's the answer. But I'm all ears in terms of figuring this one out.
Well, we'd love to hear from our team and everybody's ideas. Tom, I'm really curious about self-deception and identity protection, because when you talk about our high achieving athletes or women in leadership, whether we're talking corporate or sports, if we're going to be at a high level, this is part of our identity. We have been working very intentionally. We've sacrificed, we've given up a lot to get here. And of course, we want to say yes to what it takes to get on the podium, or what it takes to be a D1 athlete, or even what it takes to be a corporate leader. And every bit of our intention is pure and true when we say yes. And then when we get into it, it's much harder than we thought. It is more stressful than we thought. It requires more sacrifice than we thought. It might not be very fun. There's going to be all the reality that sets into what it takes for high achievement and high performance. And I'm really curious, as I am in this business and listening, it's almost as if we're rewriting high performance. Like, we want it to feel a certain way. We want it to not stress us out as much. And I always think about the gym, and whenever we're in the gym and we're doing reps, if we just go into the gym and do reps on things that make us feel really good, yes, it'll keep our body strong. We won't get stronger. We won't get better. We'll just stay the same with being and not get worse. And so I'm really curious about that stress level and how we actually move into high performance in a way that's intentional. And so what, from an identity management, protecting our identity, and the self-deception that sets in, that I start defending myself, because I don't want to face the truth that I might not make it, or this is harder than, especially when I think about social media. I mean, all of the pressure on, the excitement of signing for a scholarship, and the parents' engagement in, my daughter is at this place, and my identity as a parent and being a winner because my daughter made it. And then you have a coach that doesn't play my daughter. And all of a sudden, it can't be my fault or my daughter's fault. She was a superstar before she met that coach, or before she came into D1. We know in the system that all of these are part of the change management, going from high school to college and D1 and all that happens. But emotionally, I'm going to start spinning, and I need to blame someone for it. What do we do with this?
Well, I think that you've laid out very clearly the mental process that many athletes go through. And I think one step is to, of course, have the athletes go through that process as we've described it in more detail, almost like a class that they have to attend in addition to engaging in their athletic that it's almost a required class. Maybe it's, once a month or something like that, but it's from someone outside who conducts this and says, this is what you're going to feel. You need an outlet. And the question is, how do you assign appropriate levels of responsibility to your feelings? Is it yourself and others? And you're right, Carlette. That's why I rarely blame athletes, because I know that good or bad, 18 or 38, people engage in self-deception. They tell themselves what they want to tell themselves. And all I can do in my particular role, remember, my specialization is in understanding bias, athletics at a micro level, and this is your expertise. And I would just say that what I can do is say, look, I don't know all the answers to it. I just know that the one thing you shouldn't use to assign blame is a protected class of an individual. You shouldn't use gender. You shouldn't use race. And the reason I focus on this, but also in a non-blame and shame way for universities, is to say, look, if it's race or gender that's causing an athlete to have taken this radar of searching for blame and assign blame for that reason, you may not be able to stop the athlete from blaming a host of other issues improperly or just complaining generally, but you can stop the athlete and expect the athlete to not lay blame because of their coach happens to be female or a gay female or potentially an African American. You can stop them because it's illegal. You can't do it. You're not supposed to do that. So the point is, it gives universities kind of power to gently push back and say that, and so they can, so that's what I kind of deal with, because I'm trying to cut through a systemic problem. But you're right. The details of how you talk to athletes, if you talk to them too much about it, all of a sudden, because sometimes people need to process this stuff internally. I mean, you have to solve the doubt and the self-deception sometimes on your own to really be successful, but sometimes you need help. You need guidance. And so finding that line is something that I think that, let's have that. How about this? I think that the conversation you just started is an important part of the solution to this problem, in addition to recognizing the way that gender can move us as adults and as young adults in certain ways. You've got to combine it all together, I think.
So we are committed to being champions for change. We are ready to be part of the solution for this. Any takeaways that you can empower us with immediately to just, again, be aware and understand what bias is, understand when I may be being biased or responding to it or making accusations that are subconscious?
I just would ask, first of all, any athlete who may be listening or parent who's having these, who sees their athlete or their child athlete, young adult athlete, going through a struggle, just remember that, that you need to ask yourself and the athlete to really be specific about exactly what behavior is occurring and make certain that the behavior actually occurred. In other words, what happens is a lot of young people will rely upon what they heard from their friend, who heard it from their friend, who heard it from their friend, and they assume it's true because they're not questioning their friends.
Right.
They don't want to, but they don't say to themselves, wait a minute, did the coach actually say that? When he or she yelled, was that inappropriate? If it's inappropriate, maybe there's something wrong with coaching as a whole. If you want to challenge that and say coaches shouldn't do this, you just got to think about it. For coaches, athletic coaches I'm dealing with right now, I think the best thing, you just got to educate yourself. Remember, there's a bet. I say this to university administrators and to coaches. There is a better way here. Instead of the blame and shame, instead of the letting students cause you endless headaches and endless investigations and endless stress, there's a better way forward here where you can contain and corral this problem to protect the athlete, protect the coach, and protect the university. Make it a win-win-win. I think for the coaches who want to, you just need to take a step back and educate yourself. Because I can tell you this, if coaches, there are certain red flags. If coaches hear rumors and feel they're being accused of these things, I would not sit around. I would go to your administration. I'd reach out for help. You're always glad to talk to people, Carlette. I'm glad to talk to any coach anytime, not as a paid lawyer, even just as I will help you work through this so I can see what's happening with you. Do you need help? But also any coach who has a good relationship with their administrator and says, hey, I'd like to bring some people in to educate on this. Raising awareness is number one across the United States. And then finally, anybody who believes that change needs to happen, all you got to do is stand up and create an email chain. And if you get enough people, you can change the world. And on this issue, you can change the world. And that requires everybody. So that's the best I can tell you, at least for today.
Well, and Tom, the other thing that I heard is awareness and also guidelines, us being able to set some principles for coaching in terms of managing expectations, understanding what is the standard of the way we do things in coaching. And it is a beautiful moment in time that we are evaluating everything because it's not working right now.
Right.
So whether it's bias or well-being or mental health, whatever it is, we know that there's a problem. And what an opportunity for us to come in and to be part of the solution. So to educate, to be part of the solution, and then be a champion for this and really a champion for the change for our athletes, for our coaches, for our administrators inside our C-suites as we really work through executive management and women winning, the whole world winning. I mean, I love the challenge of it being a win-win-win for everyone involved.
Yeah, and I would say one more thing, Carlette, if I might, that I know that a lot of coaches out there may struggle with, how do I talk about this? How do I go to administration? I'm afraid. I have no contract. I have a limited contract. I may have already gotten a complaint. My season's kind of rough. My athletic director isn't really my biggest fan, or I don't have a great relationship, or I feel I have no power. Okay, I know that's true. But remember what you just said about all the fears and doubt and self-deception of student athletes you described. If, coaches, if you expect a young 18 to 20-year-old athlete to deal with that in a responsible way, you've got to look to yourself too. And you've got to overcome those fears. You've got to find a way to talk about it because your future depends upon it. You need to become a champion for change and not sit back and kind of let those internal legitimate fears overcome you. There's a better way forward. And again, I really appreciate you inviting me here today, Carlette, and thank you for that.
So Tom, thank you for your passion and for your commitment to this. I mean, you and I have made a commitment to do a series on this and to really unpack it, understand it, focusing on getting educated every week, finding solutions, and challenging all of us to be champions for the change that we want. So very grateful to you. And team, we're going to pass to you. It is up to you. Go out. We'd love to hear from you. We want to hear your solutions. We want to hear your questions. We are committed to a series. So let us know what you want to hear, what you're afraid of, what you're wrestling with, what your truth is, what you're curious about. We're on your support team, and we're also here to be champions for change. So thank you, team, for being on our team, and Tom for exploring this and educating it with us.
Thank you very much, Carlette.